Hello, and welcome to the M Perspective. My name is Melissa, and I'm your host. Those with body dysmorphia have a distorted view of how they look, while those with gender dysphoria suffer no distortion. They have feelings of anxiety and depression as they truly know who they are on the inside, despite this not fitting with their biological sex. According to the New York Times, it is estimated that there are about 1.4 million transgender people living in the United States. Being transgender is more prevalent than ever, especially in children and adolescents. It is evident that transgender people in the United States and around the world live challenging lives with constant misunderstanding and discrimination. However, thanks to transgender activists and celebrities like Jazz Jennings, Laverne Cox, and Caitlyn Jenner, what it means to be transgender, along with important issues and controversy that surrounds the LGBTQ community, have been brought to the forefront. Those in the public eye have been proving that being transgender can be joyful and transformative, not just for the individual, but for those who love and accept them. So those quotes are from two different articles that I found via endocrinekids.com. It was just interesting that it was something that was geared towards children that was spreading this kind of information, that this is something that is normal and should be widely accepted among the masses. So I looked into some of the history of this, and then I found that in 1992, after a publication by Leslie Feinberg, the term transgender was brought in to become a term for gender variation in general. This was again highlighted in 1994 when activist Kate Bornstein wrote, quote, "All the categories of transgender find a common ground in that they each break one or more of the rules of gender. What we have in common is that we are gender outlaws, every one of us," end quote. The term genderqueer was then used during the mid-1990s among political activists, and in 2008, the New York Times started using the word genderqueer more frequently. In 2010, this term became even more normalized as many celebrities publicly identified as gender nonconforming. In 2012, the Intersex and Genderqueer Recognition Project was started to advocate for expanding gender options on official documentation. And now this brings me to some of those categories of those genders that they want on said official documentation. So being cisgender describes a person whose gender identity aligns in traditional sense with the sex assigned to them at birth. So somebody who is what I would call not suffering from any sort of a mental illness or like midlife crisis of some sort. So agender is people, meaning without. So it's also called genderless, gender free, non-gendered, ungendered, and those who identify as having no gender are being without a gender identity. So agender people have no specific set of pronouns. Singular they is typically used, but it's not the default. So you still can't even be sure that you're identifying them properly. Agender was one of 50 available custom genders on Facebook, which were added in February of 2014. Agender is also available as a gender option on OkCupid as of November of 2014. So we have bigender or dual gender, which is a gender identity that includes any two gender identities and behaviors. So identifying as bigender is typically understood to mean that one identifies as both male and female or moves between masculine gender expression and feminine gender expression, having two distinct gender identities simultaneously or fluctuating between them. This is different from identifying as gender fluid, as those who identify as gender fluid may not go back and forth between any fixed gender identities and may experience an entire range or spectrum of identities over time. The American Psychological Association describes the bigender identity as part of the umbrella of transgender identities. Some bigender individuals express two distinct personas, which may be feminine, masculine, agender, or other gender identities. Others find that they identify as two genders simultaneously. If you are as confused as I am at this point, then that means that your brain is actually working. A 1999 survey conducted by the San Francisco Department of Public Health observed that among the transgender community, 3% of those who were assigned male at birth and 8% of those who were assigned female at birth identified as either a transvestite, crossdresser, drag queen, or bigendered person. A 2016 Harris poll conducted on behalf of GLAAD found that 1% of millennials identify as bigender. We then have demigender. That is a gender identity of a person identifying partially or mostly with one gender at the same time with another gender. There are several subcategories of the identity. A demi boy or a demi man, for example, identifies at least partially with being a boy or a man, no matter the sex and gender they were assigned at birth, while other parts of their identity might be assigned to other genders, gender fluid, or no other gender. A demiflux person feels that the stable part of their identity is non-binary. So I'm just going to tell you right now, while researching this, these are direct quotes coming out of the American Psychological Association, different definitions for all these different types of genders. And I'm not going to break down every single gender because we would be here for 14 days. The mainstream terms of gender seem to be different than what the doctors and physicians are calling them, as we can hear here, but none of them make any sense. It doesn't matter how many times you listen to it or how many times you read it. It will not be any clearer than the first time because it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't. This is not normal. This is insanity. We're going to keep going, but it doesn't make any sense. So if you're confused, it's okay. So are the rest of us. So then you have gender fluid. Gender fluid people often express a desire to remain flexible about their gender identity rather than overcommitting to a single definition. They will fluctuate between differing gender expressions over their lifetime, or they will express multiple aspects of various gender markers at the same time. A gender fluid individual may also identify as bigender, shifting between masculine and feminine. Just please keep in mind that during bigender, they told us that that's not the same as gender fluid because you can't switch back and forth. So let's add to the insanity. There's also trigender, shifting between these and then a third gender. What gender would that be? We have no idea. Pangender may be defined as being more than one gender, or it may describe a person who feels they are a member of all genders at the same time. So there is more than two genders. This is insanity. This is crazy because everything that you've read, agender, somebody who doesn't have a gender, bigender, somebody who has two, demigender is partially or mostly with one at the same time as another. Gender fluid is going back and forth between two genders. Sounds to me like there's two genders. I don't know if anybody else is picking up what I'm putting down here, but it sounds to me like there are two damn genders and we are overcomplicating this. So then we have trans feminine and trans masculine. They may be used by individuals to describe an aspect of femininity or masculinity within their identity. Trans feminine may be used by individuals who are assigned male at birth but align more closely with femininity, while not necessarily fully identifying as a woman. Trans masculine may be used by individuals who are assigned female at birth but align more closely with masculinity while not necessarily fully identifying as a man. So, being transgender is distinct from sexual orientation. Transgender people may identify as heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, asexual, or may decline to label their sexual orientation at all. The term transgender is also distinguished from intersex. The opposite of transgender is cisgender. So, somebody who is asexual, because this really intrigued me because I didn't know if my definition from like school and biology of asexual was what I thought it was, and I happen to be correct, which now I'm more confused. But somebody who's asexual doesn't experience any sexual attraction and or does not desire sexual contact. So asexuals may also use shorthand like ace to describe their sexual orientation. But then here's the kicker. It says an asexual person can be straight, gay, bisexual, or queer because sexual attraction is only one kind of attraction. What does that even mean? So, again, someone who's asexual doesn't experience sexual attraction, but somebody who's asexual can also identify as straight, gay, bisexual, or queer because sexual attraction is the only one kind of attraction. What does that mean? Nobody knows. I've never personally heard or met anybody that identified as asexual. I don't know if any of you have. However, this one really bothered me. I tried to do some more research into understanding it, and I just ended up reading circles about how they don't have sexual attraction, but they are sexually attracted. Sometimes they're straight, sometimes they're gay. Very, very confusing stuff. So most mental health professionals recommend therapy for those that are struggling with these inner conflicts about gender and gender identity. So I started looking up some statistics about the transgender and LGBT communities, right? So, according to a UCLA survey in 2017, they surveyed about 350,000 people. Most of the highest percentage of LGBT persons in the communities live in a Democratic stronghold, such as California, Oregon, and New York, which I didn't find that to be very shocking. So LGBT identity is based on response to the question asked, do you personally identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender? Respondents who answered yes were classified as LGBT, and those answering no were classified as non-LGBT. So just some reference for the stats. They also show gender in the communities, which they describe as the sex of the individual. So it shows that 58% were female and 42% were male. It also shows that 58% of those in the LGBT community are white, while 21% were Latino and 12% were Black. The remaining were either other or did not disclose. Now, it also surveyed the age distribution among the females and men. So most people in this study were aged 18 to 24 and then closely followed by the 25 to 34 bracket. Females dominated in the younger brackets, where you saw more men identifying as LGBT in the 50 and over brackets. So socioeconomic indicators were very intriguing. 9% of females and 5% of males were unemployed. 15% of females and 12% of males were uninsured. 27% of females and 15% of males were food insecure, while 25% of females and 18% of males had an income of less than $24,000 per year. The survey was dominated by high school being the highest educational attainment for them as well. So then I came across Gallup in their 2020 research said that 5.6% of US adults identify as LGBT compared to the 4.5% in their previous study that I just read you from 2017. So according to this study, 1 in 6 adults in Generation Z considers themselves LGBT. 1 in 6 adults that are in Generation Z consider themselves LGBT. Currently, 86.7% of Americans say they are heterosexual or straight, and 7.6% do not answer the question. The latest results were based on more than 15,000 interviews conducted throughout 2020 with Americans aged 18 and older. So I just want to wrap that in because I think that that's really telling. So you have 1 in 6 adults in Generation Z that consider themselves LGBT. But you have 86.7 Americans who say that they're heterosexual or straight or know their gender, right? So that tells me that this is a Generation Z problem. This is a children's problem. And this is not a children's problem in like their development. This is a children's problem in the parenting and the households that they're growing up in and the communities and what mainstream media is telling them to think and what their entertainment world is telling them to believe, because we weren't having this problem when I was in high school. I mean, I graduated high school in 2010 and I knew my gender all the way through. I couldn't even, honestly, maybe I'm sheltered. I didn't even know a transgender person. I don't even think I still know a transgender person. Like, honestly, on an intimate level, I have no idea. Have I met them out in public? Absolutely. You know, it's a part of life, but I've never seen this oversaturation like I do on TikTok of this weird gender dysphoria and identity problem that we're seeing today. So there were some other charts that broke down Americans' view on their sexuality and what they identify as. And the ones that were interesting to me were the ones that were broken down by generation. So you can see that traditionalists, which is anyone born before 96 or 46, excuse me, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and then Gen Z. Gen Z has the highest percentage of LGBT participation. They have the highest percentage of being bisexual or not knowing what their gender is. And then as you work your way down, if you go back to millennials, Generation X, baby boomers, and so forth, you find that most people identified as the gender assigned to them at birth and then also as being straight or heterosexual, which I know is now no longer acceptable to say. They also pointed out that women are more likely than men to identify as LGBT because women are always looking for a unique place in the world because we can't just be happy with who we are. Women are more likely to identify as bisexual. Political liberals are more likely to say that they're lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender than conservatives, which no surprise there. Differences are somewhat less pronounced by party identification than by ideology, with 8.8% of Democrats and 6.5% of independents and 1.7% of Republicans identifying as LGBT. There's no meaningful educational differences. 5.6% of college graduates and 5.7% of college non-graduates are LGBT. So it doesn't really seem that education plays a big factor. However, in previous studies, it shows that, you know, the highest attainment was high school education. But it's interesting to see when you look at the data, the direct cause of the confusion, and it's Generation Z. And if we're going to keep continuing to pander to these people, it's going to continue the generations after them. But we don't seem to care about that in America. We only care about making one generation of human beings that is extremely small feel very, very good about themselves. The DSM-5 defines gender dysphoria in children as a marked incongruence between one's experienced or expressed gender and assigned gender. It must last at least 6 months and it must be manifested by at least 6 of the following. So either a strong desire to be of the other gender or an insistence that one is the other gender, In boys, a strong preference for cross dressing or simulating female attire, or in girls, a strong preference for wearing only typical masculine clothing and a strong resistance to the wearing of typical feminine clothing. A strong preference for cross gender roles in make believe play or fantasy play. A strong preference for the toys, games, and activities stereotypically used or engaged in by the other gender. A strong preference for playmates of the other gender. In boys, a strong rejection of typically masculine toys, games, and activities, and then the same thing with girls. A strong dislike of one's sexual anatomy, and a strong desire for the physical sex characteristics that match one's experienced gender. So, as with the diagnostic criteria for adolescents and adults being so similar, the condition must also be associated with clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So, listening to all this data, and I'm curious what your guys' opinions are on where we're at with the gender battle. It feels like every other day there's a new gender popping up and somebody else we need to conform to. And it was interesting. I was in Trader Joe's not too long ago, and there was a young girl that you could tell looked more like a boy. She was trying to express her male identity, I guess you would say. And I overheard the mom talking to somebody else and said, that she knew from the moment that her daughter was in her womb that she was supposed to be a boy. And it was just so disgusting and it was so sickening because you now have projected your own insanity onto your child. And now your child really has no idea what they are, what they want to be, because their mother is telling them that they're a boy when their anatomical parts tell them that they're a girl. So adults need to do better. Generation Z is a problem. So that tells me that our millennials and baby boomers are not going to be doing a very good job at raising these children, right? We have a problem if one generation in particular is spouting out this ideology that makes absolutely no sense. And then you have your mainstream moderate politicians coming out here and telling you that we should we should kind of go to the radical left a little bit and let's make a place in the world for every single one of these people because everybody needs to be special and everybody needs their place in the world and nobody can just accept who they are for who they are. And we need to change definitions in every aspect of our lives. Um, I mean, I can go on and on about all of this and my reasoning behind why I think that this is a current problem, the lack of two parents in a household, the lack of religion, the lack of a moral code, the lack of the school system actually teaching your children the difference between right and wrong and just facts over feelings, the fact that we hand out trophies to everybody for participating, the fact that we tell everybody they did a good job even when they didn't. We're so afraid to hurt these kids' feelings that we're raising them to be in these little bubbles where they scream that they need to be accepted and they need to be felt special and everybody's got to, tell them that they're doing a great job in life and it doesn't matter who you are, you can be whoever you want to be. Today you're Michael, tomorrow you're Michelle. That's a pun directed at a very specific person. Um it's just it's interesting to me that we have lost our way at this level and that the American Psychiatric Association is almost pandering to it with some of their articles that I read where they try to say that the DSM-5 is, overreaching and they're not doing a good enough job at really treating the gender problem in this country. It's not a mental illness. This has been here forever. It's we're just seeing it now because social media and these children are so brave. It's just nauseating. It's honestly it's sickening. It's disgusting. I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of catering to it. I'm tired of, if you say, excuse me, ma'am, and then, don't misgender me because I was supposed to know somehow that you want to be called they and them. Again, it's just this constant pandering and it's teaching our kids that if you scream loud enough, you'll get what you want because the United States government listens to everything that we want. And we have, changed documentation and we're trying to say that, yes, you can give hormone blockers to children in school without parental consent. And, you have to be more aware of those whose feelings you might hurt because they heard their mom tell them that they should, respond to only they, them, and they don't have a gender. And it would be bad of her to assign a gender. It's just craziness. It's absolute insanity. It doesn't make any sense. It's not based in facts whatsoever. It's based purely on crazy ideology that they think makes them feel special and different. And look at me, I'm so woke and I'm so great. And let me virtue signal onto you some more that, I treat my child with respect and she or he can be whoever they want to be because me telling them who they are is wrong and they'll figure it out on the way. Like, no, you're either a man or you're a female. I'm sorry. It's not that difficult. Um, So going down this rabbit hole was wild because I didn't understand that there were this many different ways of saying that you're a man or a woman. It's pretty wild how we have created this culture that says you must be 85 different things to fit in, and that we want to fit in so bad, but we're willing to ostracize ourselves to 85% of the country. If it makes you feel any better, there's way more people like you and I. There's way more people that are confused by this. And if, all the definitions of genders confused you, welcome. It confused me for a few days too, because we just bat back and forth between the basic facts that there's two genders and we just try to walk our way around them. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see what comes of this, because we know this is not over. This is not anywhere near close to being over. The radical left is really just getting started. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the M Perspective. You can find us on Twitter at M Perspective Pod, and you can listen to us anywhere you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so forth. Thank you so much. Have a great day.